It appears we are online right now. Let me just get out of the screen. My name is Allan. For those of you joining us on Facebook, welcome to the online Gurdjieff group. Today we're going to be discussing music and art, which is a question that came from Brian, and I've got a whole bunch of information lined up. It's still something I'm working my way through because I'm not a musician and I'm not an artist, though I like writing, and I guess that is an art form. So let's just start with Hisham. How are you doing, Hisham? How is everything in Morocco?
Everything's fine. I'm okay. I didn't get to attend the last 2 or 3 meetings because I was concentrated a little bit on the tasks I have put on myself. Yeah. On the toughest one, the hardest one was learning of a new language. I tried to bring my German language to a certain level, and to take on an examination for it. The process was a little bit tiring, but positively. What I observed is that when learning a new language, different centers are engaged in one task.
Yeah. You know, I should do a meeting on this as well, because I'm right now attempting to learn Portuguese, and Mr. Gurdjieff encouraged people, his students, to learn language. He said it's better to fill your head, you know, with foreign words that you're trying to memorize than just the automatic associations that normally flow in our brain. And then, you know, so much of our language, we don't even realize it, you know, the movement of our tongue, it's phenomenal how active and engaged the tongue muscle is in terms of touching different parts and making sounds. And then the head brain's involved, and, you know, it's a fascinating topic. Mr. Gurdjieff said philology, which is the study of language, is more important than philosophy. So it's a profound topic. So you've just given me 2 future topics. One is on the nature of suffering and what suffering is, and the difference between intentional and voluntary suffering and mechanical and unconscious suffering, and language. Karen, how are things in Mexico?
Well, they're not good right now. There's some sort of narco wars building up again, and my son and his wife and kid are over in Michoacan where this is happening, and just want them to come home safely. This country is basically in anarchy right now. It's very upsetting and very frightening, not personally, but just the fact of that there's no law and order.
Yeah. Does it give you a greater opportunity to remember yourself, to be aware? Or is it sort of like static in the background now?
It's static. I wish it were helpful, but it's more causing me insecurity on a certain level. But it doesn't affect me per se, but I don't like to go out on highways or any place where there's a lot of people. It's crazy. One sicario is just killing another one as he walks down the street.
Yeah.
So let's just say it's a little unsettled.
Yeah, I actually feel very blessed to live in Canada. We have gun control and, you know, all sorts of things. It's very, very safe here. I have no fear of walking, you know, in the middle of the night. I know that the only people really who have guns are police officers. I don't know anyone who owns a gun. Well, actually, I can't say that now. My niece's boyfriend is a gun owner, and he lives 2.5 hours in the middle of the country. And so for him, you know, it's part of his culture. But, you know, we just don't like guns. We don't like all of that here in Canada. So it's Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good.
How are things in Phoenix, Arizona?
They're good. I've been doing more traveling than I usually do, actually all summer. But I don't have anything planned coming up, so I'm happy to kind of get back into the routine, and get back to work. And I like traveling, but I don't like how it gets me out of my routine.
Yeah. Well, it depends how far you travel. You get on a jet plane, you travel halfway around the world. You get off the plane, and everything is so unfamiliar that it automatically, even though it's very hard to automatically induce a mindful state, it lifts people up to that mindful level. One of Uspensky's students said that, they should rent a train and perpetually travel around Europe. So they would get off at different countries and different places, and just to help them with that awareness. But, if you're traveling within your state, if you're traveling sort of within your environment, it might not be quite so mindfully inducing.
I was in Cancun, and there was so many times where I became more mindful because I would consider myself a pretty patient person, but everything there was just was really slow, and I had some issues with hotels and stuff, and it all worked out. And I found myself having to be extra collected, during some of the issues with like really slow or bad service.
For me, I moved to England in 1995 and lived there for 7 years. I'm British citizenship. I'm Canadian as well. And for 7 years, it was me here. And I use that as a purposeful jumping point to self-remember. The plugs are different. You have to flush the toilet differently. Everything is just slightly different. And so I really anchored that state of me. So the awareness of my body, the sensation of self, here, what I could see, hear, smell, even taste. The milk over there tastes different than the milk in Canada. And it's just, traveling and going to foreign countries is a really important way that we can facilitate our own evolution. Angelica, you've lived in many countries.
Oh God! No, you were speaking about to be safe in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about São Paulo and Brazil. No, I don't think need. I know that some place I cannot go through. Okay, but I don't think in violence because things that this is here in the air, and it's crazy. I don't think about that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sao Paulo has 20 million people.
Yeah.
So, there's got to be some really rough parts of it and a lot of poverty and things like that. So it would make you more mindful and more aware when you're outside. You're aware of people walking around you and aware of where you're holding your purse and, all of that. I was watching a video of an English lady who moved to Sao Paulo, and she was describing everything she did with her purse. She would keep it on the front, and she had this cords that she could tie so no one could slip their hand in it. And she was describing the way that she walked down the street. And I thought, that's a very mindful approach. At any rate, yeah.
I practice this to be aware when I go to the street or some place in downtown and here and there, and too much people.
Yeah. Okay, let's begin. Do a quick inner exercise. Again, I work for myself. I work for mankind. And I work for the earth herself. And Mr. Gurdjieff's wish. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. So let's just try to fully inhabit our body. Let's try to become aware of, for instance, the effect that gravity has on our body. Try to sense your body's reaction to gravity. Try to sense the bottom of your feet, perhaps underneath your thighs, your sitting bones, those pressure points where you connect with what is beneath you. And try to become aware of how your bones, tendons, ligaments, and muscles are all designed to counteract the effect of gravity. And then try to become aware of the atmospheric pressure of the air around you. People who live near mountains and go up and down mountains all the time are much more aware of the change in the atmospheric pressure. But when a storm comes in, the pressure goes down, the atmospheric pressure increases. Some people notice before storms come, bones start to ache and things like that. But it's kind of an awareness of the atmospheric pressure. And then become aware of the temperature of the room, of the air around you. And then let's move this into our body and become aware of your own internal temperature. Perhaps you can notice it more in your forehead. Maybe you can notice it in your body, underneath your arms, in your armpits. Try to become aware of your own internal temperature. And then let's move inside the mouth and become aware of our tongue and the inside of our mouth. And then let's move down into our throat and become aware of our throat. And then down into our esophagus. Then down into our stomach. And then let's become aware of the expansion and contraction of our lungs, filling and emptying with air. Even try to become aware of the movement of the various joints in your rib cage. Every time we breathe in, it's like moving a joint for the ribs. They expand with that, and then they relax as we breathe out. And then try to become aware, perhaps, of your bladder. We're very cognizant of our bladder, very aware when we have to go to the toilet. And perhaps even become aware of your colon. And then just try to become aware of the inside of your body. Try to become aware of the inside of your feet, the inside of your legs, the inside of your hips and buttocks, the inside of your lower torso, mid-torso, upper torso, the inside of your hands, arms, the inside of your neck, the inside of your head. And then let's do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, imagine, sense your body filling with sensation. So imagine pouring sensation into the bottom of your feet and become aware of the bottom of your feet, and then pouring sensation into your whole foot and feet. And then allowing this sensation, this awareness to rise up with your ankles, lower legs, to your knees, to your upper legs, to your hips and hands, to your lower torso, lower arms, to your midriff, middle back, elbows, up to your upper back, upper arms, upper chest, to your shoulders. And continue filling with sensation now up through the bottom of your neck to the top of your neck, and then up from the bottom of your head all the way up to the top of your head. And try to sense your body as one organic whole. Try to become aware of the air that touches your face. Try to become aware of the touch of clothing against your skin. Perhaps there's a different weave, a different texture to pants and shirts or socks or whatever you may be wearing. Try to sense your body. Try to become aware of your body as one organic whole. The Buddha gave his disciples an exercise, and he told them to try and become aware of the body as a bag of skin with an opening through the mouth and through the gastrointestinal tract right down to the colon and rectum, and become aware of not just the outside of the body as a bag of skin, but this almost whole, this passageway from our mouth to our colon and rectum. Try to sense your body as fully and completely as you can. Do your best to sense your feet, your lower legs, your knees, your upper legs, your hips and hands, your lower torso, lower arms, midriff, middle elbows, chest, upper arms, upper back, head. Try to become aware of your whole body. And as an aside, Mr. Gurdjieff said that relaxation should start at the top of the head and move down, but sensing should start with the feet and move up. But the goal of self-sensing is to, in a moment, become aware of your physical self. For some people, this can be fairly easy. When I was taught it back in 1981, it was very easy for me to do. For other people, it requires a lot of work. I once was in communication with someone who could only sense half their body at a time. And when it got too complicated, they lost focus. And all I could say to them was, continue and just try and try. This is the most basic form of awareness that we need in the Gurdjieff tradition. I've explained why in many other meetings, but just try to sense your whole body. And one of the important phrases that Mr. Gurdjieff talked about was the phrase, I am. And an exercise he taught some of his students was to breathe I into the solar plexus and then breathe out am into the entire body. So breathing I into the solar plexus and breathing am out the entire body. Now, in today's meeting, we're going to talk about music. And so I would like everyone who's watching, listening, to breathe I into their stomach, or their solar plexus, not their stomach, their solar plexus, and then breathe am out as a sensorial awareness into the entire body. And I'm actually going to just clip a short bit of it. I'm going to, while we do this exercise for a few minutes, I'm going to play a recording. It's on YouTube of Mr. Gurdjieff playing the harmonium. So the person producing this music that's being recorded was Mr. Gurdjieff. It was done 1948, 1949. So breathing I into your solar plexus, breathing am out into your body. Let me just, and I'm not going to play the whole recording. Okay. And then, just return your awareness to this present moment. Allow your awareness to relax. There's quite a few recordings. You just have to Google Gurdjieff and harmonium to listen to him playing the harmonium in his apartment in Paris. So let's just finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we, surrounded by an atmosphere. Normally our atmosphere is dispersed, it's pulled this way, pushed this way. It goes in the direction of our thoughts, it goes in the direction of whatever we're identified with. Mr. Gurdjieff said if we think of our mother, it goes in that direction. And it's very important to collect our atmosphere. And just as an aside, Mr. Gurdjieff said that the collected state is the first step in self-remembering, to bring our atmosphere around us, to collect it, to keep it about a meter and a half in dimension. Draw your atmosphere around you about a meter and a half. Keep it quiet, keep it tranquil, keep it still. And again, as an aside, Mr. Gurdjieff said that the more we practice this collected state exercise, the stronger our ability to do it becomes. And he said that we can do it when we're walking down the street. And it's a very interesting experience to enter into that collected state and walk down the street, just keeping your thoughts tranquil, keeping your emotions tranquil, keeping your sensations tranquil, becoming aware of the edge, the border of your atmosphere around you. So collect your atmosphere, keep it calm, keep it tranquil, keep it still. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 3. And when I get to 3, breathe your atmosphere in, and then as you breathe out, imagine something remains. Imagine that emanations from your atmosphere begin to settle somewhere inside you. 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in, and then as you breathe out, imagine something remains. And then silently, in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And then just come back to the present moment. Anyone have any observations that they could share with us about inner work, not just here in this moment with this exercise, but in general? Any observations, any questions? It's all about the inner work. The philosophy, the teachings, the ancient science of transformation, a lot of these are very head-brained. But if we do not do the inner work, if we do not do the inner exercises, nothing will grow inside us. And it's about growing our inner being. So does anyone have any observations? Hisham.
Yes, I have been two different. I have been doing 2 different exercises. I made the daily exercises about what I am doing with the hands and the feet a little more difficult. So when I'm trying to open a door, I open it with the right hand, but when closing it, I'm doing it with the left hand. And when I'm going upstairs, I must the first step must be with the right feet, and vice versa. So this difficulty of the exercise sometimes I forget with which hand or with which feet I must do the first the thing. So I stop for that moment and I think about it before doing it. So that gives me a little bit of a moment, for moments which I before acting. And the other one is I have been doing cold showers for an intermediate, and at the beginning it was very difficult because I have always this etiquette of the cold being negative. But with the process, I tried to disassociate the sensation with the feeling or with the judgment about the sensation, which I have successful with at the end, uh, uh, like inhibiting the feeling which is associated with the sensation.
Those are wonderful. I really like it when people create their own inner work rather than trying to find something in a book. The walking up with your right foot and then down with your left foot that's I've never heard that one before. I've heard of consciously becoming aware and using the non-dominant foot as you walk up steps. But that's a nice variation on the exercise, as well as, I've heard becoming conscious, becoming aware of opening doors or using your alternate hand to open doors. And the way you do it, opening with your right and closing with your left, that's adding a little twist to it. And this is all about the inner work. As you do these things, you're actually growing your inner being. Like little drops of water from the roof of a cave, though. It doesn't materialize right away. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. But, that's very good. Yeah. Any other comments? Anything anyone wants to share before we get onto the topic of music and art? Oops, Angelica, your microphone, let me it's unmute. Okay?
Yes, okay. No, for me, I can, I observe now that things around in my days are more colorful and concrete. I can look at an artwork, I can listen to sound, music, or a dog or whatever. And I feel this more presence, more concrete for me. And some days ago, I could observe my violence because I saw one butterfly at the window up, and I want to help the butterfly to be free because it was on the glass all the time and it was beautiful big butterfly. And I was stupid because I took a piece of bamboo that for me a bamboo is not heavy, but for the butterfly was too much to help her to be free. And unfortunately, I killed the butterfly, and it was terrible for me. But at the same time, I could perceive what is for me no violence to the butterfly was too much. Huh? And this came. Now I am more aware or attention with things I do with the nature. Sometimes it's better you do nothing and let the nature find the solution than try to help with something that maybe will be not good. This was for me one lesson, difficult. I to kill with one bamboo, that was for me nothing. But as these things now are more concrete, I am more aware about the atmosphere.
Well, one of the things that Mr. Gurdjieff said was, love everything that breathes. Trees breathe, butterflies breathe. Breathing, you know, trees breathe differently. They breathe in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, and we do the opposite. And, you know, all life. Basically, we're saying love all life, love everything that breathes. So this is going back now a little while. Brian, you posed a question about music. Can you ask the question again and, you know, rephrase it?
I think it was the question about whether we use all three brains when listening to music. Because, you know, I feel like when we, you know, if you're at a concert, you can feel, you know, the bass and the music actually on your body, and then you're feeling, you know, what the music is trying to, you know, the message is trying to convey. Then you're thinking about, you know, the I don't know, maybe the sounds and the instruments being used. I felt like it's like a three-body exercise when you're consciously listening to music.
Okay. In your original question, I believe you mentioned that you're somehow involved in music therapy.
Oh yeah, okay, that too. You know, I can't even remember what the original question was. I have so many questions in regards to music. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe the healing properties of music, was that it?
You just mentioned that you were involved in music therapy somehow. How are you involved in music therapy?
Okay, so I take healing sounds like gongs and bowls and you know, chimes and harps and sounds that have been used for, you know, thousands of years as a ways to calm the mind down, and then I mix it with like hip hop and like lo-fi jazz music to provide more energy, and I put clients on rowing machines, and so they're rowing, and then we integrate the breathing with these two styles of music for like a therapeutic effect.
What are the results?
They've been very good, actually, especially for older clients that they've been out of exercise for a long time. It's a very nice, like, low impact workout for them, so they can at least get the body moving and then focus on the breath, and then we add in the music, so it helps relax their brains, so they're not as focused on the discomfort of working out, and they can, you know, become just, you know, more mindful. It's like conscious workouts, I guess.
C.S. Knott talked about a conversation he had with Madame de Hartmann, Thomas de Hartmann's wife. And she said that music was often used in older societies for doing manual labor, physical labor. So if they were carpet weaving, they would be singing together. If they were out in the fields, they would be singing. And C.S. Knott noted that in one of his father's factories in England, his father made gloves, the woman would sing, and it increased productivity. It sort of brought people into alignment. So if you're all moving at the same time, there's a collective energy that forms through that. This is coming from C.S. Knott with this conversation with Madame de Hartmann. But I've got some quotes on art and music with by Mr. Gurdjieff. Now, I have to say, this is a real difficult topic for me, just because I'm not a musician. I adore silence. For most of my day, when I'm by myself, it's silence. I love quiet. My ears, if I go to anything that's even moderately loud, I've got to put earplugs in. Loud noises and things like that just really do something wrong within me and my ears. And so if I go to a concert or anything like that, I've got to wear earplugs and try and reduce the sound. So this is not a topic that I've really spent a lot of time pondering. But I'm going to pull up some quotes from Mr. Gurdjieff. Whoops, let me just move this back to the side. Oh. It is important to learn to distinguish this attention from mechanical attention. Music played during exercises diverts the movement innate in us, which in life is the chief source of interference. Actually, when you talked initially, Brian, about the quote, you quoted this next sentence.
Okay.
Music alone cannot separate the whole of our unconscious automatism, but it is one of the aids to this. Music cannot draw away the whole of our mechanicalness, but for a moment, owing to the absence of other means, we shall use only music. One thing is important, and he's talking about using music in the context of his sacred temple dances, or what we now call the Gurdjieff movements. One thing is important. While performing all the given external tasks to the accompaniment of music, you must learn from the beginning not to pay attention to the music, but to listen to it automatically. At first, attention will stray to the music from time to time, but later it will be possible to listen to music and other things entirely with automatic attention, the nature of which is different. It is important to learn to distinguish this attention from mechanical attention. As long as the two attentions are not separated from one another, they remain so alike that an ignorant person is unable to distinguish between them. Full, deep, highly concentrated attention makes it possible to separate one from the other. Learn to know the difference between these two kinds of attention by taste in order to discriminate between our incoming thoughts, information on one side, and differentiation on the other side. I'm just going to stop sharing this for a moment. It's going back 12 years now. Back in 2006, 2007, I spent a year studying Gurdjieff movements. We did weekly movement classes. And Mr. Gurdjieff here is saying that when the people who were beginning to learn the movements, and the movements are extremely complex. You might be moving with a certain rhythm on one side of your body and another rhythm on the other. It's all designed to focus attention. And here he's distinguishing between a certain kind of physical awareness of the music and just automatically listening to the music. He didn't want people to automatically listen to the music when they were dancing. He wanted them to focus on the body and allow another part somewhere in our subconscious mind to listen to the music, so that you moved the body in rhythm with the music, but the focus was on the body, and the focus was on harnessing attention. So there's he differentiated, two different words were used: automatic attention and mechanical attention. So the automatic attention is, you've got to move your foot, say your right foot with a certain, part of the music, and your left foot with another, and then turn and then twist and do various things. So you're paying attention to your body, you're trusting your body is moving in rhythm with the music, but you're not focusing on the music. You're not mechanically aware of the music. This is lifting you up to a higher level. And he talks about the need to begin to differentiate between automatic attention and mechanical attention. So when people were doing movements were so complex. They were exercises in attention, really focusing on the body, focusing on the specific individual components of the movements while moving in harmony with the music, as opposed to just mechanically moving with the music. Most dancing is really just mechanically moving with the music. There's not that mindful awareness on the body. There's not that mindful awareness on the actual movements and steps of the body. It's just a lot of people, they want to go into a trance. In other words, they want to go into a more deeper mechanical state. And they're just moving, and they're not really aware of the body. The movements were so difficult that even the most accomplished movements teacher or dancer were never able to do them fully 100%. There was always that being on the edge. You want to find that edge where you're competent to incompetent, and stay on that edge and push yourself. So just going and dancing, and a lot of people, they're out of their minds. They may be drunk, they could be high on drugs or whatever, and they're really moving to the music, but it's a mechanical movement to the music. And he's talking about something different here. Let me go to my next quote. And this is about art, and it's about music. And this is an In Search of the Miraculous. I will try to make my idea clear. You say an artist creates. I say this is only in connection with objective art. In relation to subjective art, I say that with him, it is created. If you do not differentiate between these, but this is where the whole difference lies. And actually, I'm just going to make a comment here. Mr. Gurdjieff worked with a group of women in the 1930s called the Women of the Rope, or the Ladies of the Rope. And a lot of them are writers. And one of them said, I go into this wonderful state when I write. And Mr. Gurdjieff just, he just said that is not a higher state. It's more like a hypnotic trance. She went into this reverie, and everything that happened in her mind as she was at her typewriter or pen and paper writing, and she would feel inspired, but she lost herself in that process. She got too much into the reverie, so it created. It wasn't an act of her conscious volition. It was very a mechanical, mindless form of creativity. Further, you ascribe to subjective art an invariable action. That is, You expect works of subjective art to have the same reaction on everybody. You think, for instance, that a funeral march should provoke in everyone sad and solemn thoughts, and that any kind of dance music, Komarinsky, for instance, will provoke happy thoughts. But in actual fact, this is not so at all. Everything depends upon association. If on a day that a great misfortune happened to me, I hear some lively tune for the first time, this tune will evoke in me sad and oppressive thoughts for my whole life afterwards. And if on a day when I am particularly happy, I hear a sad tune, this tune will always evoke happy thoughts. And so with everything else. The difference between objective art and subjective art is that in objective art, the artist really does create. That is, he makes what he intended. He puts into his work whatever ideas and feelings he wants to put into it. And the action of this work upon men is absolutely definite. They will, of course, each according to their own level, receive the same ideas and the same feelings that the artist wanted to transmit to them. There can be nothing accidental either in the creation or in the impressions of objective art. So here he's saying that objective art always creates the same feeling, it creates the same response within us. Whereas subjective art, everyone approaches it, hears it, engages with it differently. It may make one person happy, it may make one person sad, depending on the individual associations within them. But subjective art does not affect everyone in the same way. It calls forth various subjective associations within that person. Someone may be drawn to red or repulsed by blue or whatever. And these are subjective impressions that could go back to their childhood. And so it's sort of like playing on their associations and bringing up this association and this feeling and that feeling. And these can be very different for different people. But objective art is supposed to bring forth the same reaction, the same feeling. In subjective art, everything is accidental. The artist, as I have already said, does not create. With him, it creates itself. This means that he is in the power of ideas, thoughts, and moods, which he himself does not understand and over which he has no control whatever. And this is what he meant when he was talking to that writer in the 1930s, that she was under the spell of these thoughts. She didn't control them. She was just typing and writing them out. And in this stream of flow of ideas, she wasn't really present. She wasn't really aware of herself. She was just more in a trance state. So this means that he is not in the power. This means that he is in the power of ideas, thoughts, and moods, which he himself does not understand and over which he has no control. They rule him, and they express themselves in one form or another. And when they have accidentally taken this or that form, this form just as accidentally produces on man this or that action according to his mood, tastes, habits, the nature of the hypnosis under which he lives, and so on. There is nothing invariable. Nothing is definite here. In objective art, there is nothing indefinite. A question asked to him, would not art disappear in being indefinite in this way? Asked one of us. And is not a certain indefiniteness, elusiveness, exactly what distinguishes art from, let us say, science? If this indefiniteness is taken away, if you take away the fact that the artist himself does not know what he will obtain or what impression his work will produce on people, it will be a book and not art. So a series of questions asked by students in St. Petersburg. I do not know what you are talking about, said G. Mr. Gurdjieff. We have different standards. I measure the merit of art by its consciousness, and you measure it by its unconsciousness. We cannot understand one another. A work of objective art ought to be a book, as you call it. The only difference is that the artist transmits his ideas not directly through words or signs or hieroglyphs, but through certain feelings which he excites consciously and in an orderly way, knowing what he is doing and why he does it. Legends, said one of those present, have been preserved of statues of gods in ancient Greek temples. For example, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which produced upon everybody a definite and always identical impression. And this is a wonderful definition of objective art. It produces upon everybody a definite and always identical impression. Quite true, said G. And even the fact that such stories exist shows that people understood that the difference between real and unreal art lay precisely in this, an invariable or else an accidental action. Can you not indicate other works of objective art? Is there anything that it is possible to call objective in contemporary art? These are questions asked to him, recorded by Uspensky. When was the last work of objective art created? Nearly everyone present began to put these and similar questions to G. And this is something I've noticed on Facebook. On my Facebook wall, when I post comments that Mr. Gurdjieff made about art, they get the biggest reactions, the biggest questions. And so the difference between objective and subjective art. Before speaking of this, said G, principles must be understood. If you grasp the principles, you will be able to answer these questions yourself. But if you do not grasp them, nothing that I may say will explain anything to you. It was exactly about this that it was said. They will see with their eyes and not perceive. They will hear with their ears and not understand. I will cite you one example only, music. Objective music is all based on inner octaves. And it can be attained not only definite psychological results, but definite physical results. There can be such music as would freeze water. There can be such music as would kill a man instantaneously. The biblical legend of this destruction of the walls of Jericho by music is precisely a legend of objective music. Plain music, no matter of what kind, will not destroy walls. But objective music indeed can do so. And not only can it destroy, but it can also build up. In the legend of Orpheus, there are hints of objective music. For Orpheus used to impart knowledge by music. Snake charmer's music in the East is an approach to objective music. Of course, very primitive. Very often is simply one note, which is a long drawn out, rising and falling only very little, but in the single note, inner octaves are going on all the time, and melodies of inner octaves which are inaudible to the ears, but felt by the emotional center. The snake hears this music, or more strictly speaking, he feels it and he obeys it. The same music, only a little more complicated, and men would obey it. So you see that art is not merely a language, but something much bigger. And if you connect what I have just said with what I said earlier about the different levels of man's beings, you will understand what is said about art. Mechanical humanity consists of men, number 1, number 2, and number 3. And they, of course, can have subjective art only. Objective art requires at least flashes of objective consciousness. In order to understand these flashes properly and to make proper use of them, a great inner unity is necessary and a great control of oneself. So there's a lot to unpack in this quote. The talk about inner octaves, that objective music, that there are like chords, there's like a keyboard, a piano perhaps, inside us, and that the notes of the music with objective art plays those inner octaves within us in exactly the same way. They touch everyone the same way. And the difference between people being touched is a difference between the level of their being. So man number 1, 2, and 3 will be touched by objective music, but they will not be able to create objective music. Whereas when you start to be man number 4, when you start this step on the mystical path, when you start to remember yourself, when you start to become mindful, when you start to become aware, you step up to that threshold where you may have flashes of objective consciousness. And I'm just going to flip over to this diagram here. Can you see the diagram?
Yes.
Okay, so it's hard for me to know what's on my screen. One I've shown many times. Where are my, okay, just here they are. So this is man number 1, 2, and 3. You know, Mr. Gurdjieff said to think of ourselves as 3-story factories. And we have like a basement, a ground floor, and an upper floor. For normal mechanical humanity, their upper floor is the planetary realm, which is the mindful state, which is the state of personal consciousness. So a normal person can have flashes of that state of mindfulness. They can every now and again experience mindfulness, but it requires great effort on their part. And they're also subjected to the lower emotions of World 96, feeding the moon. But when you enter into the level of man number 4, which is stepping and centering yourself in World 24, at your highest then, it's like you move the house, the 3-story house, up the hill. And your lower level is the level of mechanical man, while the higher story is the awakened state. And if you notice over here, this is the word that Mr. Gurdjieff used to describe that level, objective consciousness. So someone who is no longer in the mechanical state can tap in and have moments of objective consciousness, which is fueled by hydrogen-12. So someone who is beginning to grow their Keston body, someone who is beginning to do inner work, will have these flashes of objective consciousness. However, if we look at the conscious man, he's right in this state. So he's able to produce things that will have a definite effect on people depending on the level of being. But he will invoke a similar reaction to them. Now, objective consciousness requires a little bit of explanation. Right now, I'm in a room and I see all these chairs, I see a couch, I see a table, I see lamps, I see pictures. This is subjective consciousness. I'm actually projecting the meaning of a chair onto items in the room I am in that have a form similar to a chair. I think I've mentioned this before in previous meetings. I once went for a walk in the woods when I lived in the country, and I found this stone, this rock that was in the shape of a throne with armrests, a way to sit. This rock was at least 13,000 years old when the glaciers melted and whatever. But I sat in it. I saw a chair in the forest, but did the bears that walked by it see the chair? Did the birds that landed on it see a chair? No. I project so much meaning onto the world. So what I see is really very much a subjective understanding of the world. I have chair associations, table associations, lamps associations. I know if there's a light standing up, there has to be a way to turn it off. These are all associations. However, to imagine, say that I was a squirrel that came into the room, what would I see? And what would the squirrel see that I would see? They wouldn't have all those labels, all those words, all those understandings. The squirrel is not at the level of objective consciousness, but we begin to see the problems that we have to surmount in order to achieve that state of objective consciousness, to perceive things as they are. And awakening is lifting oneself up and up and up to higher and higher levels. And it's also jettisoning and getting rid of a lot of nonsense in ourselves. And the getting rid of the nonsense allows us to see things more objectively. Let me go to the next quote. Okay. Speaking of art, he said, and this quote, love not art with your feelings, always provokes a reaction when I post it on Facebook. Speaking of art, he said, love not art with your feelings. Real art is based on mathematics. It is a kind of script with an inner and outer meaning. In early times, conscious men who understood the principles of mathematics composed music, designed statues and images, painted pictures, and constructed buildings, all of which were such that they had a definite effect on the people who came into contact with them, on their feelings and senses. There is a room in a monastery in Persia, for example, the proportions and volumes of which are such that everyone who goes into the room begins to weep. And this comes from C.S. Knott, the teachings of Gurdjieff. So, Mr. Gurdjieff said, if you hear a funeral march on a day you got great news, hearing that again will always invoke that response. Whereas if you got bad news and you heard an uplifting music, it will create that response. He's talking about the subjective nature of our own individual associations. Certain songs take me back to my childhood, and they take me back to specific moments. My associations with those songs are so great, but they're subjective associations. So it pulls forth all of these subjective things from inside of me, whereas objective music should be like playing me on the inside, like a masterful musician, a masterful pianist, creating, deliberately causing me to feel certain feelings, to experience certain experiences. The next quote is a rather lengthy quote. This comes from Meetings with Remarkable Men. And, my pronunciation of Vitsakeya, I don't know if that's, she was, I always thought the Meetings with Remarkable Men should have been renamed, Meetings with a number of remarkable men and one remarkable woman. Vitsakeya. To my questions, Vitsakeya finally replied that the cause of her state was, as she expressed it, that damned music. And she asked me if I remembered the music of the night before. And the night before, they were in a monastery, listening to very monotonous music that had a profound effect on them. Gurdjieff, I didn't, this is his commentary, that he's not saying this to her. I did indeed remember how all of us, sitting in some corner of the monastery, had almost sobbed, listening to the monotonous music performed by the brethren during one of their ceremonies. And although we had talked about it afterwards for a long time, none of us could explain the reason for it. After a little pause, Vitskaya began to talk on her own accord. I do not remember whether there was anything in the music that touched me inwardly when I was still quite young, but I do remember very well how I thought about it. Like everyone else, I did not wish to appear ignorant, and in praising or criticizing a piece of music, I judged it only with my mind. Even when I was quite indifferent to the music I heard, if my opinion was asked about it, I expressed a view for or against according to circumstances. She's describing, our subjective experience of life and how we subjectively do this. Sometimes when everyone praised it, I spoke against it, using all of the technical words I knew so that people should think I was not just anyone, but an educated person who could discriminate in everything. And sometimes I condemned it in unison with others because I thought that if they criticized it, there was doubtless something in it which I did not know about, for which it should be criticized. But if I praised a piece of music, it was because I assumed that the composer, whoever he might be, having been occupied with this matter all his life, would not let any composition see the light if it did not deserve it. In short, either praising or blaming, I was always insincere with myself and with others, and for this I felt no remorse of conscience. Now here there's a number of things to unpack. One is the hypnotic quality or the herd-like quality of humanity. You got to listen to this, and then you listen to this, and you want to be a part of a group, you want to have connections, you want to whatever, and you begin to like the music because it was recommended, or people say, oh, this is crap, don't listen to this, and we absorb their impressions. And then the other thing, the difference between the subjective awareness and the objective awareness. Again, this was subjectively aware of music, looking at how it affects someone and deciding whether or not you're going to be contrary in that moment to go, no, I don't like it, or yes, I do like it, indicating the subjective ways that we interact with things. Also here, just this last bit that I read, she recognized that in either praising or blaming, she was being insincere with herself or with others. And, for this, I feel no remorse of conscience. And I've done meetings of remorse of conscience. It's a very important feeling to feel. But, recognizing the insincerity of a lot of our education, and she's talking about her education around music and her connection with music. Does she go along with the herd? Does she oppose the herd to make herself seem more educated, more discerning? These are forms of insincerity, forms of lying to ourselves. So there are buffers involved in this process. Later, when that good old lady, the sister of Prince Lubovetsky, took me under her wing, she persuaded me to learn to play the piano. Every well-educated, intelligent woman, she said, should know how to play this instrument. In order to please the dear old lady, I gave myself up wholly to learning to play the piano. And in 6 months, I did indeed play so well that I was invited to take part in a charity concert. All our acquaintances present praised me to the skies and expressed astonishment at my talent. One day after I'd been playing, the prince's sister came over to me and very seriously and solemnly told me that since God had given me such talent, it would be a great sin to neglect it and not let it develop to the full. She added that as I began to work on music, I should be really educated in this field and not just play like any Mary Smith. And she therefore thought that I should first of all study the theory of music and, if necessary, even take an examination. From that day on, she began sending for all kinds of books on music for me, and she even went to Moscow herself to buy them. Very soon, the walls of my study were lined with enormous bookcases filled to overflowing with all kinds of musical publications. I devoted myself very zealously to studying the theory of music, not only because I wished to please my benefactress, but also because I myself had become greatly attracted to this work. And my interest in the laws of music was increasing from day to day. My books, however, were of no help to me, for nothing whatsoever was said in them either about what music is or on what its laws are based. They merely repeated in different ways information about the history of music, such as that our octave has 7 notes, but the ancient Chinese octave only had 5, that the harp of the ancient Egyptians was called a tabuni and the flute mem, that the melodies of the ancient Greeks were constructed on the basis of different modes, such as the Ionian, the Phrygian, the Dorian, and various others, and that in the 9th century, polyphony appeared in music, having at first so cacophonic effect that there was even a case of premature delivery of a pregnant woman who suddenly heard in church the roar of the organ playing this music, that in the 11th century, a certain monk, Guido d'Arezzo invented solfege, and so on and so forth. All of these books gave details about famous musicians, about how they had become famous. They even recorded what kind of neckties and spectacles were worn by such and such composers. But as to what music is and what effect it has on the psyche of people, nothing was said anywhere. I spent a whole year studying the so-called theory of music. I read almost all my books and finally became definitely convinced that this literature would give me nothing. But my interest in music continued to increase. I therefore gave up all my reading and buried myself in my own thoughts. One day, out of boredom, I happened to take from the Prince's library a book entitled The World of Vibrations, which gave my thoughts about music a definite direction. The author of this book was not a musician at all, and from the contents, it was obvious that he was not even interested in music. He was an engineer and mathematician. In one place in his book, he mentioned music merely as an example for his explanation of vibrations. He wrote that the sounds of music are made up of certain vibrations which doubtless act upon the vibrations which are also in a man. And this is why a man likes or dislikes this or that music. I at once understood this and fully agreed with the engineer's hypothesis. All my thoughts at that time were absorbed by these interests, and when I talked with the Prince's sister, I always tried to turn the conversation to the subject of music and its real significance. As a result, she herself became interested in this question, and we pondered it over together and began to make experiments. The Prince's sister even brought several cats and dogs and other animals specifically for this purpose. We also began inviting some of our servants, served them tea, and for hours on end played the piano for them. At first, our experiments produced no result, but once when we had guests of our servants and 5 of our servants and 10 peasants from the village formerly owned by the Prince, half of them fell asleep while I was playing a waltz of my own composition. We repeated this experiment several times, and each time the number of those who fell asleep increased. And although the old lady and I, making use of all kinds of principles, composed other music intended to have different effects on people, nevertheless, the only results we attained was to put our guests to sleep. Finally, from constantly working on music and thinking about it, I grew so tired and thin that one day the old lady looked at me attentively. She became alarmed and, on the suggestion of an acquaintance, hastened to take me abroad. We went to Italy, and there, distracted by other impressions, I gradually began to recover. It was only after 5 years passed that we went on our premier Afghanistan expedition and witnessed the experiments of the Monopsyche Brotherhood that I again began to think about the effect of music, but not with the same enthusiasm at first. In later years, when I remembered my first experiments with music, I could not help laughing at our naivety in giving such significance to the guests falling asleep from our music. It never entered our heads that these people fell asleep from pleasure, simply because they had gradually come to feel at home with us and because it was agreeable after a long day's work to eat a good supper, drink the glass of vodka offered to them by the kind old lady, and sit in the soft armchairs. After witnessing the experiments and hearing the explanations of the Monopsyche brethren, I later, on my own, returned to Russia, resumed my experiments on people. I found, as the brothers had advised, the absolute law, according to the atmospheric pressure of the place where the experiment was to be carried out, and tuned the piano correspondingly, taking into consideration also the dimensions of the room. Besides this, I chose for the experiment people who already had in themselves the repeated impressions of certain chords. And I also took into consideration the character of the place and the race of each one present. Yet I could not obtain identical results. That is to say, I was not able by one and the same melody to evoke identical experiences in everyone. But here, the day before yesterday, this music, almost without melody, invoked the same state in all of us. People not only of different race and nationality, but even quite unlike in character type, habits, and temperament. To explain this by the feeling of human herdness was out of the question. As we have recently experimentally proved that in all our comrades, this is within the seekers of the truth, that within all of our comrades, thanks to corresponding work on themselves, this feeling, the feeling of herdness, is totally absent. In a word, there was nothing the day before yesterday that could have produced this phenomenon and by which it could be somehow explained. And just as a little bit of an aside, back in the 1940s, Frank Sinatra's promoters went and paid some young women to pretend to go into a swoon and faint when he was singing. And this spread like wildfire, so that soon all these young women were attending, concerts where Frank Sinatra sang, and they were screaming and going into this swoon. There was a hypnotic, herd-like quality to that music. They're doing it, I can do it. And for a lot of our understanding of music, this is what happens. I'm just going to finish with another quote. This one comes from Thomas de Hartmann. It's just an idea of how they composed music together. This was in Constantinople in 1919. A good upright piano was rented. Uspensky provided a masculine element. He sent a group of tall young men who, with great enthusiasm, began to come to every evening for gymnastics. I saw that, as in Essentuki, our work was always on strengthening attention. Mr. Gurdjieff continued the exercise he had given in Tiflis, but at the same time he added new ones. I will describe the beginning of one of them. First, he demonstrated a movement with the foot and leg very sketchily, then steps and turns. We had to learn these. Then movements of the arms and head, learn these as well, then combine the leg movements, then combined with the leg movements. I observed all of this from the piano. At first, it seemed to be evolving into exercises he had already given in Essentuki, schematic and rather dry. He gave me the tempo of the exercise and the melody himself, which he had written on paper, from which I was expected to improvise the music on the spot. But then he gave me also a separately written upper voice, which was meant to sound as if played on sonorous little bells. It was now impossible to play everything with two hands, so he told Madame de Salzman to play the lower part and me the upper part. I struggled feverishly to get it all down on paper, and we began to play. When he added the movements already given, in an instant, everything was suddenly transformed into a dance of the dervishes. The more the pupils entered into the dance, the more exciting and beautiful it became, full of a magical force characteristic of all other dervishes. Copying and editing the music of the dance was very interesting. Everything had to be done then and there according to his instructions. The melody was now in my left hand with the added voice above it. He told Madame de Salzman to double the main melody 1/6 lower with her right hand and play the rhythm with her left. It was amazing how the accompaniment, the upper voice, and the two main voices, a sixth apart, blended together like parts of a single machine. So that sort of gives you an idea of how Mr. Gurdjieff went about writing music with Thomas de Hartmann. I doubt this is the answer that you were hoping for, Brian. Does it answer a lot of your questions or any of them? And
it helps. Definitely interesting, fascinating topic. It's a little complex. I'll probably have to go back and watch this again and let it absorb a little bit more, but it helps.
Okay. Any other comments about this? Subjective art produces subjective feelings. Objective art produces the same feeling in everyone. I consider Beelzebub Tales to his grandson, the book itself, to be a work of objective art. What it does to people. I remember after my 6th reading, I ended up at one point just bawling my eyes out and then going outside and realizing the world hadn't come to an end yet. And I had no idea how he did this. I knew it was done by the book. It was in the chapter on war, and when certain things happened, and I knew he was playing me like a piano. It was a very interesting experience. That's the only real experience that I've had personally with, I mean, I also believe the Bible is an objective work of art, but somehow the first time I read Tales, I was infuriated. I was upset with the book. And this is such a common experience that people who read it for the first time, you know, get very angry, very upset. It's intentionally and deliberately composed to summon that feeling within us. The second time I read it, as with a lot of people, I couldn't believe how foolish I was the first time I read it, how I got so angry and upset and judgmental of a lot of comments. And then the third time I read it, it was a completely different experience. And I can only imagine what it would be like to listen to objective music. But as Vitkesia said, you know, you've got to measure the dimensions of the room. You've got to take the atmospheric pressure. You've got to tune the instrument to the universal law, whatever that note is. So if you play music in one room and then you play it in a different room, it could evoke a different response. So there was a mathematical quality to music and to its effect on us. Any final comments, observations before we finish?
When you were speaking about music and how it's objective music and how it has the same effect on people of the same level, an association about the tales where Gurdjieff of the Beelzebub was with his friend the Sufi, and he at first the Sufi didn't know about Beelzebub and his level of being, and then he tried an experiment with music on him. Normally he would have to get a little burning in his body, but he didn't get it, and then the Sufi knew that he was on another whole high level. But where did this come when we say that music affects people, objective music affects people with the same manner? But here he didn't got affected.
I mean, that's in Tales. He goes into quite a bit about music in Tales, talking about how it can make plants grow quicker, how it can heal wounds, all sorts of things. But I don't really like talking about Tales, just because you only have one chance to receive a first impression. And reading Beelzebub Tales, at least for the first time, is all about receiving first impressions. So if we talk about it beforehand and you go already expecting these things in it, you can't experience and confront them for the first time. But just in Meetings with Remarkable Men, he sent the Vivek Kaskana to the Middle East somewhere to work with the Essenes. And he personally talked about how he spent time with the Essenes and saw them play music and saw plants growing much quicker than they should have. But at any rate, we're out of time. It's just a little past noon. I think next week I'm going to talk about suffering. Hisham brought that up just before the meeting started, and it's a massive topic. The difference between intentional and voluntary suffering, the mindfulness and whatever. So I hope to do that in the next meeting. At any rate, I'd like to, Karen told me earlier that she was going to have to leave partway through, so she's left. But I would like to thank the rest of you for being here, and those of you watching on Facebook and those of you watching on YouTube. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks, Allan.